What happens to your business when you're ready to step away? That's exactly what we talk about on today's episode. Welcome to Pet Sitter Confessional, an open and honest discussion about life as a pet sitter. Today, we're brought to you by Timed Pet and the Peaceful Pet Music, Calm Music for Pets YouTube channel. If you are looking for a CEU, continuing education unit for either PSI or NAPS, this episode is eligible. So listen to the episode. Go to the link in the show notes or on our website to take the quiz and get your certificate to earn that today. Erin Fenstermaker is a certified exit planner and industry consultant, and today she breaks down the key elements that make a pet business valuable and sellable. She also discusses the importance of recurring revenue, documented systems, and building a team of employees versus independent contractors. My favorite part of the discussion revolves around being emotionally ready to have a successful exit. Whether you're brand new or 30 years in, this conversation should offer a roadmap to long-term value and future-proofing your business. Break out your pen and paper. Let's dive right in and get started.
Thanks, Colin. Sure. I have been in the pet industry for over 20 years. And about the last 12, I've been doing both consulting in the pet industry and selling pet product companies. So I know most of your listeners are pet service businesses, but there's a heck of a lot of overlap in what I do. And most of my consulting work is on the services side. So there's a lot of knowledge, hopefully, that I can bring to some of your listeners today. What I typically have been doing is on the consulting side, I work with pet services businesses to help them with some of the biggest challenges that they might have, like their financials, converting from independent contractors to employees, maybe evaluating an opportunity for them to buy another business or to sell their own business. Because I do have expertise, I also sell pet product businesses. Most of those businesses are doing at least $2 million in EBITDA or above, so they're quite large. But the fundamentals of what makes a business attractive are the same regardless of the size. So I like to educate the people that I work with about some of those things so that if they are looking to sell and or are looking to acquire a company, they know some of the fundamentals to be focused on. One of the things that I do bring a lot of value in, because I have this arm where I'm selling pet companies, pet product companies, is I actually do all of the marketing and due diligence when we sell those companies. So I do a lot of research about the niches. Why is this segment growing? Why is this company successful? You know, what are the macroeconomic things that are making this an attractive company to buy? And so I love that part. I love like digging into that research and finding out what's growing in the pet industry and why. Okay. And so those are some of the insights that I bring often to my clients in the pet services industry. Who don't necessarily have the same access to that information as I do. And I can say, this is why I recommend this for your business, because I don't like to push rocks up a hill. I like to do things that are a little bit easier if you can, you know? So, you know, if the trends are saying this, let's get on the trend and ride it, you know, versus trying to grow a segment potentially in their business that might not be growing for whatever reason.
You know, is there a danger to trend writing at all, though, to a business? And how do you balance not getting caught up in that trend? And, you know, if like a short-lived trend versus a long-term view of the business?
The trends that I really look at are longer-term trends. Like, as an example, right now, over the last 3 to 5 years, really since COVID, post-COVID, the adoption rates with cats are higher than they are with dogs. And in addition, it's not only people, there are actually fewer people getting single cat households, but people that have one cat are getting 2 cats or more cats. So there is an increase in the number of cats per home because of, you know, people's interest in cats. Well, why is this happening? Well, there's all these macroeconomic reasons why cats are cheaper to have than dogs. And if you look at, you know, millennials, people living in apartments, you know, they have more restrictions around all these kind of trends. To me, that's not a trend. You know, that's a macroeconomic cultural thing that's happening. You know, if somebody's like, oh, I like the color blue, you know, that might be a trend. I don't know. But these are things that to me are worth paying attention to, because if it doesn't speak to you, don't do it if it's your business.
Yeah.
But if it speaks to an area that you like and you would like to exploit, then really look at what's happening in that area, because there's a lot of business to be had if you are paying attention to the bigger trends that are going on.
It's really kind of what's behind it, like what's the supporting nature of that, and really, how long do you think those are going to last? We look in our area, there's the rapid growth of like, oh man, they're not building single family homes a lot in our area. What are they building? They're building multifamily. They're building tons of apartments. So, putting that in alignment with what you're saying is, okay, well, statistically, it's likely that the people in those apartments are more likely to have cats than dogs.
Yes.
So how do I then take my services and
speak to those people? Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're it's the old, you're a 50-year-old single cat lady stereotype is going out the window. Cat owners are younger. They are millennials. They are unabashedly proud of being cat owners. They're the Taylor Swift. You think about her and her cats as an example. That's the new cat owner. It's not the 50-year-old woman that doesn't have any friends that lives by herself and has 6 cats. When that person still exists and can be your customer, you really need to look at the demographics of who is adopting now and how different they are, and thus the way that you attract them is going to probably be a little different than the 50-year-old single woman.
Yeah.
I'm of those people, but of those as clients, but. But paying attention to those kind of things is what can really make a huge difference in your business if you know how to speak to the audience.
Well, I know we're talking about selling there, but I believe there are a couple different ways to possibly exit a business, which I think is kind of interesting for some people, because we have a lot of listeners who, they're just getting started in their business in their 20s. And so the idea of exit planning, what are you talking about? Like, this is, I don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow. And it's so right. Yeah. So from your perspective, I'd like for you to talk about kind of what exit planning means for a small business. And if from your context, if there's anything unique or different for the pet industry specifically.
That's a great question. So exit planning is essentially answering all of the questions, personal, financial, and operational, around the process of selling a business. So let me jump back, because you said something that really tugged at my heartstrings. Most people are running their business, have no plans to exit. But 50% of all businesses across all industries sell because of an unplanned event. They call them the 5 Ds in exit planning: death, divorce, disagreement, disability, and distress. So you could have one of these 5 things happen. You get disabled by a car accident, you have cancer, you have a disagreement with your business partner, all of these kind of things, or maybe you're in financial distress because you were overpaying your team members. All of these kind of things can force a close or a sale of your business at any time. So if you know the average business out there that's running today in America has a 50% chance of one of these 5 Ds happening to them at any time, wouldn't you want to run your business so that if any of them happen to you tomorrow, that you would be ready to sell at that time? So that's essentially the mindset to think about. Is exit planning is simply good business strategy. Is my business transferable to someone else? And if so, what makes it transferable? And why is my business not transferable versus somebody else's business who may be transferable? And so let me give you an example. Yeah. A lot of smaller businesses that start in this industry start as, what we call solopreneurs. They start out as a one-man band. I myself am a one-man band. I choose to be a one-man band on purpose. But I know I have the opportunity to bring on team members, as some of the pet service professionals that listen to this show. And so if you are simply a one-person band, then essentially you don't really have a business. You've got a glorified job that you have created for yourself. But essentially, it's not a transferable business, because a transferable business has policies and procedures, has people that could step in for you at a moment's notice if necessary, and continue to run the business just like you were there. So when you think about it as a business owner, and say, if something happened to me tomorrow, if I wanted to go on a 2-week vacation, would I be able to do that And do I have people that would come in behind me and be able to actually perform all of the functions from soup to nuts, from payroll to scheduling to insurance to all of those things? If the answer is no, I don't have that, then your business is not transferable. So it's not really sellable until you get it to the point where you have all of those functions reproducible by somebody else. Does that make sense?
It does, especially I think a lot of us think initially of, well, I'll have employees to do the dog walking, to do the pet sitting. So now I have been replicated. But the thing that I know that Megan and I have realized more and more of, like, well, if I'm still the one doing all the scheduling, all the admin, all the hiring, all the firing, all of the phone calls, all of the marketing, all this, well, then the business still relies on me to run. And what you're talking about here is can you fully step out? Because then the business can run completely on its own without you being the bottleneck or you being the
correct. So the areas that you have mentioned, because typically this means that I'm not going to really be able to start thinking about, being able to quote replace myself in these areas until I reach a certain level of scale. Right? Because then it just doesn't make sense to have you don't have the extra income to hire somebody to do those things. But that's really the goal. If you want your business to be sellable, you need to get it to the place where you could, in theory, maybe you outsource your marketing and social media. Maybe you have a scheduler that works part-time. Maybe you have, another advisor. You can piecemeal. It doesn't have to be one person, that's replacing you in totality. But you have to have backup plans for all of those areas. And even if you don't have some of those areas with a person in mind that could do them, having the processes of what you do documented is equally as good and important. Because again, if somebody, Lord, have mercy, you stepped off the curb and got hit by a bus, would somebody have a roadmap to step in and do your job if you were not there? And so it really is a process of doing the documentation to have all of those. This is the how-tos of running the business, and or the bodies to do that work, whether they're outsourced contractors, third parties that have their own businesses, or somebody that you pay on a part-time or full-time basis.
What are some of the more common misconceptions that somebody may have about or around selling a business?
Well, I would say the number one is always the value of their business. Okay. The concepts that I just described as to what makes a business sellable, and the fact that it has to be transferable and duplicatable by somebody besides you. Most people don't think about their business from that perspective. And thus, as a result, they may inflate the value of their business because they think, well, gosh, I'm doing all of this and, I make this much money, so my business has to be worth a lot. Maybe it is, but in most cases, the transferability aspect that I mentioned is kind of the first test. How easily could somebody step in and do your role based on the processes that you have set into place, or because of the other people that you have that know how to do it? Those are the kind of the first tests. So because of that, if people don't have that and they think the value of their business is quite high, unfortunately, I have to have some uncomfortable conversations sometimes at the beginning to say, well, no, your business isn't going to be a lot of value until you can do one of those two things. I would say that's probably the biggest. The other thing that I think is really important in our industry in particular is to think about who is going to buy your business one day. Because there are really two types of buyers in a pet services business like ours. There's what we call an internal buyer. And an internal buyer is somebody that you know already. Maybe it's a client. Maybe it's an employee that works for you. Maybe it's just somebody that has seen your business and admires it and says, gosh, I'd love to have that business one day if you're ever interested in selling it. But I call it an internal buyer because that buyer wants to buy the entire business. They're going to buy the name. They're going to keep your website, keep your social media. They're likely going to keep the entire team. Your prices don't change. Your schedule, nothing changes. You simply have a new person running the business. That type of buyer is going to be the highest value buyer. That's going to be who's most likely to pay you the most amount of money for your business because they need everything that you have built. The policies and procedures that you have set up, the website that you built, all of those things, you've already done that. So they are going to pay a little bit higher, most likely, in most cases, for your business. But those buyers are often difficult to find. If you're not looking for them proactively, which I think is part of the exit planning process, is look around you. Who do you know that you think might be a good person to buy your business one day that you think shows some of the same sort of skills that you have that would make them successful? But if you don't have such a buyer, maybe a business broker can help find that person for you. The second type of buyer is an external buyer, and that's typically going to be a competitor in your area. Somebody that's already doing the same services that you are doing. So they already have, dog walking and pet sitting. They already know how to run that business, but they don't need your website and your company name. And maybe their prices are different than yours. And maybe they're employees and you're independent contractors. And then maybe they use Time to Pet and you use Precise. So you look at all of the things that are potentially not aligned because you run your businesses differently because, you can choose to do that. But as a result, the risk to that buyer in taking on all of your stuff and trying to convert your clients over to them goes up because they're going to have to change a bunch of things. So you're going to have to try to convert all your team members over to their team. Their pay might change, hopefully for the better. Maybe if they were independent contractors, now they're going to change to employees. Maybe you're going to have to raise some prices so not all the clients come over. You think about all of the potential things that might need to be changed in that kind of a scenario, and that increases the risk to the buyer. So the buyer should pay less because of all the risks that they are taking on in potentially taking your business. But that buyer is way easier to find. You can just look them up on Google and see who your competitors are, So I mentioned those two types of buyers because you can't approach a buyer as the same. Those two buyers are very different. And the price that they would pay is different because they come to the table with different risks that they would take on. So that's something that's really important to keep in mind when you're thinking about, well, what is my business worth? Or worth to who?
Yeah. Yeah, I got. It's kind of like when you go for the right home buyer too, right? Are you going to sell to somebody who wants to have a move-in ready home and keep everything the same? Well, that price is a little bit higher and not as negotiable versus somebody who's going to come in and completely flip it and destroy and tear it down, right? And so it's interesting to know that same thing exists in selling a business, and so
exactly the same.
Yeah, and to know that. Okay, well, so if I'm selling my business, I really have to know who I'm talking to, and sit on their side of the table and go, what's motivating them? What are they going to do? Right? Like I'm just thinking of going, well, how valuable is my Google business listing to that person? Well, if they're already doing what I'm doing and in my same area, it's not that. Not at all. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And so, and that's where most people, most business owners in this space aren't thinking about it from that perspective.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that I have one of the things that I do is I'll advise people in this space that are considering selling or they're considering buying and they just want to, get my input about, am I paying too much? What should I offer? What are those kind of things? All of those scenarios can be very, very unique based on the circumstances. There's about probably 15 or 20 questions that I typically ask about who the target is, and say, well, let's talk about all of these things because the more aligned that you might be. So let's just use an example here. Let's say there's a company that wants to sell and they happen to have a competitor in their market that's pretty aligned with how they do business. Maybe their pricing is already pretty close. They're both employees. Maybe they use the same scheduling software. The more things that are aligned, the better for the price. Because that means less likelihood of turmoil and every opportunity that a client or a employee has to leave because something changes, is a risk, right? So that's one of the things that I always look at. If you are looking at maybe making an acquisition in the industry or selling your business to somebody that's acquiring, is how similar are you in those areas? Do you have similar pricing? Do you are you both employees? Or are you both independent contractors? Are you using the same scheduling software? How are you paying your team? Are they totally different? Are they the same? The more things that are the same, the higher likelihood that's going to be a good acquisition. And that it will be successful, as long as you put some things in place to make it happen. The more things that are off and that are different, the more risk there is, and thus the price that should be paid should be lower.
When should a business owner start this process?
Well, I said, they should start the day they open. They need to, the day they open, they need to realize what makes my business valuable. So I'll use myself as an example. I opened my business back in 2013, and I made a conscious decision at that time that I did not want to have employees. And so I knew that meant I'm not going to be able to sell my business. I have a business, I have a shingle, I have a website, but I have created a job for myself. I have not created something of value that is duplicatable by others. So part of it has to start on day one is, what is your intention with the business? If your intention is simply to have a job for yourself, fantastic. That was my choice, and I'm happy I made that choice. But for other people, if they think, no, I really want to sell this business one day, maybe this is going to help fund some of my retirement, then what they are going to be tasked with doing is very different than what I would be tasked with doing in my shoes. So if I know I need to be transferable and duplicatable, well, then I need to make sure I'm running the business on a daily basis to make my business more and more that way.
Have you heard of Time to Pet? Dan from NYC Pooch has this to say.
Time to Pet has been a total game changer for us. It helped us streamline many aspects of our operation, from scheduling and communication to billing and customer management. We actually tested other pet sitting softwares in the past, but these other solutions were clunky and riddled with problems. Everything in Time to Pet has been so well thought out. It's intuitive, feature-rich, and it's always improving.
If you're looking for new pet sitting software, give Time to Pet a try. Listeners of our show will save 50% off your first 3 months by visiting timetopet.com/confessional. Well, because making something transferable doesn't happen overnight. And I think that's really important to know. Is start day one, day zero, maybe, so that you have years to work and build up and get the structure, as opposed to going, like you said earlier, like 50% close and have to, because of an unforeseen event. Right? Going, well, I can't just convert all of independent contractors to employees within 3 days, and I can't write all of my SOPs and policies. Even with ChatGPT, that's not possible, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And that's where I think intention, it has to start with your intention. What is your intention when you started your business? It changes over time, because that happens as your life circumstances change. But once it's clear to you that you want to be able to sell this business one day and have it be as valuable as possible, as soon as you know that, you need to start thinking about, how am I going to make it transferable to somebody else, and make sure I'm starting to do all of those little things that are required to do that.
I know you talk about in other places about this thing called to accelerate value in a business. And I'd like for you to expand a little bit on this and why it's so important.
Yeah, so there's a term in exit planning called value acceleration. And basically what that is, and the process of accelerating value typically happens after somebody like myself does an analysis of your business. So let's say somebody hires me to analyze their business and where they are, because they do want to sell one day and they want to make sure that they're creating something of value, and they want to know maybe how much it's worth, in its current state. So in that process, I'm going to look at everything from both an external point of view, like your brand, your pricing, your margins, how long you've been in business, your online reputation. I'm going to look at all of these external things. And then I'm also going to look at what's called your exit readiness, which is all of looking under the hood. So I'm going to look at your HR practices. I'm going to look at your policies and procedures. I'm going to look at your employee manual. I'm going to look at all of the internal things that signal whether you are ready to transfer that business to somebody else. And then in that process, I make a list of recommendations of all the things that you're doing well and what you're not doing so well at, and giving you a list, essentially a to-do list of things that you need to work on. Once you have that list, I also can give you an average value of your business. So let's just say I'll pull it out of the sky. I say your business is today worth about $100,000. Let's just pretend. And I said, but you need to work on, these 7 or 8 things. If you work on these 7 or 8 things, I believe that will increase your business value by 50% or whatever the number is, depending on what I find. And so the value acceleration is I'm going to work on all of these things because it's not just your revenue that determines how valuable you are. That's one component. It's we call it in exit planning. There's 4 intangible capitals, other things that do not show up on a financial statement that are really important about building value in a business. And they have to do with your team and with your customer list and with your products and things like that. So things that aren't going to show up on a financial statement, but are equally as important. And so those things are typically what's going to help grow your value. And if your systems aren't any good, if you have no systems, all of those things are going to detract from your business value. So value acceleration is taking the list and actually taking action on it. And then it accelerates the value because typically you just continue running your business. You're just adding in these layers of new things that need to get done or be systematized as part of running your business.
It's very interesting to talk about those intangibles in the business and the value, because I know many people may have this perception. I know I certainly did for years of, all you do is you look at the revenue of the business and then you multiply that by like 3 or 4 or 5, right? And insert random number here, and that's how much your business is worth. And for those listening to the podcast, Erin is shaking her head vigorously.
No, please. This is the way I look at it is, there's actually a visual example that I have in a particular presentation that says, here are 2 businesses, and it says, they both from a financial perspective look the same. Their top line and even let's say their net income is the same. But then you look at all of the intangibles. Who's got great company culture? Who has a great public persona? We go on Google and on the reviews and, people are raving madly about them. Which business has been in business 2 years and the other one's been in business 25 years? There's so many things that set you apart that have nothing to do with your revenue number. And those are important things. I don't want to get you wrong. But even your gross profit number, the number one thing that I see, the biggest mistake I see in businesses in this industry is their cost of goods sold number in terms of what they are paying for their dog walker or pet sitter to do the visit. That is the number one problem. Most companies overpay their team members. And so, I'll see particularly independent contractors those models tend to be kind of the biggest violators of the healthy rule in that respect, where I've seen anywhere between 55 and 70% is being paid to the contractor. That is not a tenable business model over time. In a healthy range with employees, you need to be paying between 45 and 55% of whatever the service is to your team member. That includes the 7.65% payroll tax that the employer pays. So that means if you're charging $25, let's say, as an example, for a service, that you need to be paying, and you have employees, you need to be paying around $10 or $11 to the team member for that service. And that overpayment is what is one of the biggest things that lowers the value of your business. Because if you have no money left to do advertising and to have good insurance and to improve all of if you're an employee-based business, to improve the value of what you are able to deliver to your employees and what you can deliver to your customers, you don't have any money left for those things.
Well, let's talk about that from a sellable, transferable business. From your perspective, independent contractors or employees, which one's going to help me maximize the value of my business?
Absolutely employees. I mean, I can tell you, I've been in the industry since late 2007, 2008, a long time. And I personally have chosen not to work with companies that use the independent contractor model because I fundamentally don't believe that it's the right model to perform the best level of service in this industry. I think employees is really the only way to go. Though I do work with people that are choosing to convert from independent contractors to employees, because I think it's a challenging thing to do, and I am more than happy to help people do that because I think it's so important to the longevity and the professionalism of the industry. But having employees to me is a mandatory. Because if you're going to be able to provide the best level of service, you've got to be able to train your employees. They have to have processes and policies and procedures around what they do and the service that they perform. If you are using independent contractors, you cannot do that legally. And most companies that I have seen that use independent contractors are not following the independent contractor legal guidelines and are in violation of the law whether it be in their state or on a federal level. I would say the bulk of them are. So, it's unfortunate. I know that it's easier to have an independent contractor model. Trust me, I get that. It's way easier. But the employee model is really much more attractive and frankly has less risk attached to it as a result. Because I can tell you most companies that use independent contractors today, if they were audited by their state or by the Department of Labor, they would fail the audit. Because they are providing guidance and are training and or giving too much guidance around how to do the job, which is the legal definition of an independent contractor.
So does the lower valuation from using independent contractors, does that come from, I mean, I guess it sounds like it's coming from a multiplicity of factors. Like one, you talked about the increased payroll per person, right? Those margins are cut into because they're paying a higher percentage. And then also just the attractiveness and risk to the potential buyer of what they're taking on.
Correct. Because the thing about most independent contractors, if you actually follow the law to the letter, it says that an independent contractor can work for other companies doing the same thing. Yeah. So that means that they can work for Rover, they can work for WAG, they can work for another local competitor. And unfortunately, as many of us know in the industry, the propensity to steal clients when you have that model is pretty darn high. And so, it's not, when you look at the loyalty that an independent contractor has to their employer, it's typically lower than if you are an employee of a business and are receiving benefits, perks, and training, as part of your employment there.
Right. We've mentioned some of the intangibles. I did want to come back to a little bit of the revenue of the impact that plays on a business. Is there a difference that the kind of revenue that we get plays into that? Of like, if we can prove that we have reoccurring revenue of we get the same X number of dollars every week from reoccurring dog walks or whatever, versus like a truly, I guess it's more like business models in this world of going, okay, I've got pet sitting, who I've got really high highs, low lows, kind of no guarantees, versus this reoccurring, I've got daily dog walks, I'm doing these things or poop scooping, whatever that is. How does that influence the value of a company?
That's a great question. Reoccurring revenue is valued at a higher rate than the unpredictable pet sitting revenue. The challenge, though, is if you really look at what the macroeconomic trends that have happened since COVID, unfortunately decimated the reoccurring walks space and culturally changed how people go to work, because the introduction of this hybrid workplace, or frankly more work from home, has dramatically impacted the number of people that are looking for reoccurring walks, or looking for them. They used to have them every day, and now it's only 1 or 2 or 3 days a week. So unfortunately, what I've seen over the last 5 years since COVID is that even as COVID, kind of petered out and people went, quote, back to work, the number of walks did not go back to the heydays that were prior to 2020, when it was, blowing and going and growing exponentially. It's really been a stagnant market ever since COVID. And so I have seen a lot of the clients that I have worked with have really had some tough moments trying to decide, particularly from a couple of different reasons. There were some companies that are out there that's all they did was recurring dog walks. Those companies, unfortunately, got really hurt during COVID because it was a very feast or famine situation, because that was the only thing that they had to bring in revenue. The companies that I work with that have a combination of dog walks and recurring dog walks and pet sitting fared a little bit better, because they had they spread out their risk when it came to the types of services that they had. They have more types of services. So if dog walks went away, they could potentially try to promote their pet sitting a little bit more. So what I have seen is that the post-COVID, the companies that do both dog walking and pet sitting and or do more pet sitting are doing better than the companies that are just doing dog walks, because there are fewer dog walks out there and everybody's fighting for the same client. And so the competition is really high. That's not to say that some people, one company in a market might be doing great in it. But if you look at the health of the overall market, it's way harder to get those consistent reoccurring walks because everybody wants them because they are great for having consistent revenue and consistent work for your team, but they're harder to get than they've ever been.
And that plays back into do we understand our market too, and not get caught up in, hey, what are people in Chicago doing, or what are people in Dallas doing? What are people in Miami? What are people in LA doing? We really have to, it takes us understanding our local business and our local economy to know what's driving here so that I have a business that fits. Because the last thing we want to do is be following trends in another part of the country that don't match our local trends, and then we don't have a business, right?
I mean, I have clients that'll say, I personally, this is just my personal preference. If I was going to open a business today in this space, I would not do a dog walking only business. I would absolutely do dog walking and pet sitting, and I would probably add training and poot scooping. I would want to defray my risk across a number of services. That's my personal, just because I'm risk averse, right? But I have some people that said, I really want to run my business Monday through Friday, and I don't want to have to do a lot on the weekends or at bass hours. And so I'm going to suck it up and hope that I'm going to still be successful. But, to me, that every business owner has the right to make that decision for themselves. They just simply need to understand the market dynamics that are going on, because, I'm going to tell you, I wouldn't necessarily make that choice because of what's going on unless you want to work way harder on the marketing side to try to convert more clients that are looking for recurring dog walks. And if that's not your area of expertise, then don't expect your business to continue to flourish if that's the case.
Well, and I love how you said, you've got to work harder to get those fewer clients. And so if you just look at that balance sheet, I'm going back to your example of, look, these two businesses look the same. They're both, $300,000 in revenue, but one of them has to spend $80,000 in marketing, right? To get, so what valuation, so that's all stuff that we have to consider as we look at the health of our business and the transferability of it. And that's just really cool. I'm taking lots of notes, Erin.
Well, good.
As a pet professional, you know that some pets struggle with anxiety, whether it's thunderstorms, fireworks, or just being home alone. But did you know that calming music can actually help them relax? That's why so many pet pros are turning to the Peaceful Pet Music, Calm Music for Pets YouTube channel, ourselves included. This channel is packed with soothing melodies, nature sounds designed to create a peaceful environment for pets. We like to use it both during visits to calm anxious pets and even after we leave by just turning it on and playing it on YouTube for overnight calm or just during the day. Give every pet a little more peace during the day. Subscribe to the Peaceful Pet Music, Calm Music for Pets, and hit the bell so you never miss a moment of calm. I know a word that gets thrown out, or I guess some letters that get thrown out when we talk about mergers and acquisitions in this kind of realm is EBITDA. And I don't know if did I pronounce that correctly? I don't know if
that is.
Okay, cool. Okay, this is a term that I hear thrown out a lot. And I'd love for you to talk about kind of what that is and why it matters when we sell a business.
Okay, so EBITDA is earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. So what that essentially means is, and let me back that up one step further, because most people that have used an accounting system to manage their financials of their business are familiar with the term net income. Yeah. And so, this is where I am, I trust no numbers until I dive into them. So if somebody says my top line revenue is this and my net income is this, what is my value? I'm like, I have to ask more questions because I can't just say that. I need to know more about how your business is constructed. So as an example, even the net income number doesn't mean a whole lot unless I find out from that business owner, how do you pay yourself in the business? Because, for example, if you as a company that has employees choose to pay part of the owner's compensation via payroll, then that's going to show up on my profit and loss statement. If, as the business owner, you only take a draw where you don't pay payroll taxes to yourself, you pay them later, it shows up on your balance sheet, which is a different financial statement. So and the number one expense in all pet sitting and dog walking businesses is the compensation to the owner. That's the biggest expense there is. So I have to know how you're booking it. Where is it? How do you pay yourself? Because until I know that, I can't tell you if your net income is good or not. Because I have to compare. The way I look at it is I compare whatever in my mind I'm comparing to every dog walking and pet sitting business that I've ever seen. And I have to normalize them and have them all look like apples to apples, but based on how you pay yourself, your financials might look very different. And so I say this because net income by itself is not just the holy grail number that you start with EBITDA. I want to know, how are you paying yourself as the business owner? If you're paying yourself via payroll, then your income amount is subtracted before you get to your net income. If you're paying yourself on a draw, it's not showing up on your net income at all. And it's the number one expense for a business in this. So I have to know that in order to calculate EBITDA, because it's a factor in at least comparing business to business. Most companies, and to answer your question, EBITDA is usually used as the number to multiply against in an industry. So for example, I might say, it's very typical in our industry to take EBITDA times 4 or 5, the number 4 or 5, as the value of a business. So you first have to have your net income, and then you have to add back interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization, and you get a new number, whatever that number is. And then you multiply that by 4 or 5. That typically is an average range for your business. Sometimes you can use a multiple of revenue, usually 0.75, maybe 1 sometimes. I look at both of the numbers, and then I look at all the factors that don't show up on your financial statements, like your longevity, your classification of your team as employees or contractors. What are your gross profit margins? Are you in a healthy range or not healthy range? Are you been in business 2 years or 20 years? How long has your team been with you? Is everyone there 3 months, or you've got a bunch of people that have been with you 2-3 years? How long have your clients been with you? Like, I look at all of those kind of things to help determine the value of what I'm seeing. So you can't just look at one place. It's one place that is the right starting point. But, it's as an example, if I say, oh, you're 3 to 5 times this number, everyone automatically says they're the 5, thinks they're the 3.
Obviously. Come on.
And so you got to slow your roll here for a second. You might be a 3 because of all of these things. So until I know all of these other things, I can't possibly tell you where you are. But that's one of the reasons that, I can look at a business, ask a bunch of questions, and do some analysis of where they are. And I can get a pretty good value of what their value is today if they went to market for whatever reason. And if that number isn't the number that they want a higher one, well, then I can give them the roadmap for what they need to do to improve the number to get to the number that they want.
For the EBITDA, what's one of the, or maybe some or a handful of the biggest things that influence that, specifically in the service-based businesses?
Well, it starts with what you're paying your team, because the first thing is what the owner is paying themselves. That typically is the largest expense. But then the second is, how much are you paying your team? If you're paying between 45 and 55% of revenue to your team, that's a healthy range. I bless that business and say you're doing great. You're in the right healthy range for a business of this industry. If you're paying more than 45 to 55% of every dollar to your team members, that's considered unhealthy. And so that just means you're going to bring less to the bottom line or less to your EBITDA because you're giving more of it to your team. Okay.
Yeah.
So, that's where really looking, I'm a very big advocate of looking, I don't like price increases, just willy-nilly price increases. I like to look at what's going on in the market, what's going on in the economy, and try to be judicious around when to do a price increase and that sort of thing. But don't be afraid to raise prices to fix those things. I mean, that's one of the number one things that I work on projects to do is to evaluate. I'll give you an example. I'm working with a company right now in California that was using independent contractors, and they need to convert to employees. They were paying their independent contractors between 60 and 63% of every dollar went to their contractor. So they're outside of the healthy range before we even calculate employer payroll tax, before we calculate workman's compensation. And in the state of California, you also have to pay mileage and cell phone reimbursement. Mm-hmm. So we had to do a lot of the number crunching to figure out how we were going to be able to get them in a healthy range, be able to pay their team what they were getting paid and or more, just with the taxes taken out, and increase the pricing to their clients. So we had to do a lot of modeling around that to figure out what was going to be realistic based on what they were charging today. And we were able to figure out and have been successful in doing the conversion. But it's a lot to look at. There's a lot of moving pieces and parts. But it's a really important exercise because you want to make sure once you do it, if you are going to take on the conversion from independent contractors to employees, you want to make sure you come out the other side in a healthy place, and that you're happy with how it went, even though there was a lot of stress and sleepless nights along the way. It's really a great decision for your team and your team members.
Well, I know that a lot of that can cause some anxiety in that conversion because it can influence not only how much people are charging, but even the kind of services that they were offering. I know a big one are like overnight services.
Great example.
Okay. Right. And that one, all of a sudden you go, I've got an employee. Well, what are my state regulations for pay over sleep? How do I handle overtime? What does that look like? And then sometimes we have certainly seen businesses who go, overnight care is 70% of my business and I want to convert to employees. Man, you've got to make some really, really tough decisions there and figure out how you're going to make that work.
Well, that's a great example. And that's one of you're correct. When I've worked on these conversion projects, overnights tend to be one of the biggest stumbling blocks. And, there's several ways to handle it. There have been, and let's talk first from the macroeconomic level, because where there is growth in the pet industry has come from the high end of the pet industry. If you actually look over the last 5 years since COVID, it's not that there were people all throughout lower, middle, and upper income adopting pets. It was primarily in the medium and high income. So it was people that had money, that already had pets, that were getting more pets. So they're spending a lot of money on their care, on services, their supplements, vet care, because they want the absolute best for their furry friend. And the reason that's important is because how that translates into our industry is that means people want more time. If I'm a client going out of town, I don't want 20-minute visits once or twice a day. I want hours. I want overnights. I want more because my babies are important to me, right? So that means you really have to look at legally what you can offer. I mean, there are some people that will be able to pay, extra high prices on overnights, but that's not the bulk of people. And this is where I also think, services like what I call almost overnights, where maybe there's a 2 or 3 hour service that's performed in the evening and then the sitter goes home and then returns in the morning. So you can repackage it into a slightly different format. But again, it still speaks to that customer who wants more and more and more time for their baby. I think the other thing that's brand new and frankly where our industry, the locally based businesses have not jumped on board yet, and I think should, is really looking at in-home boarding. Because if you look at Rover as an example, while I don't love the business model for Rover by any means, I have to respect the fact that they are growing at 25 to 30% each year. And most locally based businesses post-COVID are not growing at that pace. So I have to look, well, what are they doing that's different than what I'm doing? And one of the things that they're doing is they're offering a lot of in-home boarding. And think about it. That makes sense when people want more and more care for their animals. So I actually think that's one service type that should really be evaluated to see if a business is comfortable figuring out how they could offer that on a local level as an alternative to overnights, because of the things that are kind of built in detractors of doing that if you're using an employee model business.
Yeah, and for that, it definitely is not just how am I paying people, but does my city or county have licensing and inspection requirements for kennels, things like, am I living in a good spot? What's my neighborhood allow? Like, there's that all of a sudden gets into that side of things because I know, like in our state, like if you want to offer boarding for pay overnight, well, that's a kennel license right away, and that requires inspections from the Department of Agriculture. Like, if you really want to do that, by the books. Yep. And so, like you said, like that's something that as a business, if everything's on the table, if you're following market trends, what does that mean for how I shape my business?
Because I like to look at what is going on. What are the bigger factors going on that should influence what I choose to offer as a service? I know that there are a lot of people on the higher end of income that have more pets and they want more service. They want more time when they're out of town or they're traveling or what have you. So I have to figure out how I'm going to choose to handle that. And, every business owner is going to be a little bit different in terms of what they choose and what they're comfortable with offering. But knowing that, even if it's a matter of, there are some services or some businesses I've seen as an example that just offer 20 and 30-minute visits. I'm like, where are the 45 and the 60-minute visits and the multi-hour visits? To me, those are huge areas of opportunity if you want to grow your business, because that is what the trends are saying is happening, is pet parents want you to spend more time when they can't. Right. So they will buy almost anything. Right. Within reason, of course. Yeah. But you got to think about that and make the right decision for you and your own business.
I know we've talked about selling a business and kind of this exit planning and everything involved. How do you walk business owners through the emotional side of this process? Because if somebody's had a business for 15, 20, 30, and we know people who've been doing this for 35 years, and all of a sudden it's time for them to step away, how do you help people kind of walk that line versus just sitting down and calculating EBITDA and what my revenue is like that?
Such a great question and such an interesting one, because I know, because I have seen the impact of people's selling their businesses. I've sold their businesses and I've seen what happened afterwards. I'm very happy to say that in most cases, they were very happy endings. But there's a lot of cases that it's not. And let me tell you why. One of the reasons can be, the first thing that I always am going to look at and ask when someone says they want to exit their business is I want to make sure that they have enough money to live on. Have they done all of the math that they needed to do and talked with a financial advisor to make sure that whatever number it is that they think they're going to walk away with, is that enough? Because if it's not enough and you didn't know, or you don't even know what that number is, what the number that you need, then is this the right time to sell? So I want to first cover that, because that can be problem one, because nobody wants to go back to work after they've retired, right? No. And then I would say secondarily, I would say by and large, the business owners that have the softest landings when they exit their business are the ones that have something that they are looking forward to doing on the other side. Those that have nothing, they don't have hobbies, they don't have trips to take, they don't have, maybe a spouse that's wanting to go blah, blah, blah to these different places. You've got to be going towards something besides your business. Because think about it. One of the saddest days that a lot of business owners say is, I used to be the center of the world for 10 or 15 people and all these clients, and my phone was ringing constantly. And the day after you sell, those aren't your problems anymore. Those calls are going to somebody else. And suddenly your really full life and all these personal interactions that maybe you didn't even value or see how much they were adding to your personal, day-to-day zen. And suddenly those are gone and you don't have anything to replace those relationships with. Those are the folks that potentially are going to have a harder landing post business sales. So I like to make sure and ask, what do you want to do after this? If they didn't have much to fill in the blanks, then that's when I really start saying, look, I know that is problematic to go from, most people running a business in this space are really busy people. So to go from running 1,000,000 miles an hour to zero overnight is not usually the best recipe for most people. So what is it that you're going to fill your time with, that in particular that you're looking forward to, that maybe you couldn't do because you were tied to your business and tied to staying in town, more often than you wanted? Find those things that are going to fill your cup up before you exit, and make plans with them for right after, so that you immediately have some things that you can immediately step into and start transitioning into whatever that new life is going to be. Those are some of the things that I've seen. And then, of course, it's always scary. Depending on who's buying the business, there's uncertainty. There's your team members that you are going to miss. But I think it's smart to ask that question and to place equal emphasis on it, as much as the number that you're going to get if you do sell. Is how you plan on spending your time, and what are you looking forward to that you're going towards. The more people that have a tangible answer are going to be the ones that are more are happier with the exit than those that can't answer it, can't fill in those blanks.
Another reminder that our whole life, while it may feel like it is our business, it's not whole. It's not who we are entirely. And to start as you look at going, hey, how transferable is this? What systems can I build in? What else am I filling up with my cup and for who I am? Because there's going to be a day where this business isn't around anymore, or I'm not involved in it. So what does my life look like? And to know that, numbers are important, structures are important, policies are important, having employees is important. But me too. Like, what am I doing and how am I taking care of myself? And it's just from beginning, middle, and end of the business. We have to keep that first and foremost. And I love that so much, Erin.
Yeah. And it's funny you say, we talked earlier about having two businesses whose financials look the same. And I've even had a client that, let's say, we did some work together and maybe the financials didn't change. But what may have changed that didn't show up on the financials was they took a vacation for the first time and weren't on the phone the whole time. And, or maybe they chose to work only 3 days a week or 30 hours a week or whatever the changes that they wanted. But the financials stayed the same. Would you call that success? I certainly would, especially if that's what they were trying to get out of the work that we did together. Because, every owner is different in terms of what they want and what they want to prioritize and how they want to live their life. And so, I want to listen and hear, okay, what is it that you want? Then let's figure out how we can make it happen.
I love that. Erin, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today, for walking us through these really important topics that even if we aren't looking to sell right now or in the future, it still helps build value and gives us a better life right at the end of the day. I know this is a really big topic. You do this for a living, is talking about this stuff. So if people are interested in getting connected with you, following along and reaching out with some questions, how else can they do that?
So you can go to my website. It's my full name, erinfenstermaker.com. You can also, if you Google me, I'm with my very unique name. I'm pretty easy to find, and you can just reach out on my website. I have a contact form there, and that's really the best way.
Cool. Yeah, well, I'll have that in the show notes so people can get connected and follow along. Erin, this has just been such a wonderful conversation. I'm so thankful for your time today. Thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me.
My biggest takeaway from my conversation with Erin was when she said that exit planning is simply good business strategy. The things it takes to exit a business well turns out actually set us up to be successful and run a strong business today. Business fundamentals will always be the right move. It doesn't mean complicated or way out there in left field kind of planning or strategies. Fundamentals, basics, when we focus on those, when we lean into those, it helps us today and in the future. One step at a time is all it takes. And as a reminder, this episode is eligible for one continuing education unit from PSI or NAPS. Go to the link in the show notes, take that quiz, and get your certificate and turn that in today. We want to thank today's sponsors, Time to Pet, and the Peaceful Pet Music, Calm Music for Pets YouTube channel for making this show possible. And we really want to thank you so much for listening. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and we'll be back again soon.